Hi, it's Crystal, and welcome back to my daily reading. Today is chapter 4, and in chapter 4, we have all three of the male narrators come together, and they're coming together in death. One of my favorite books was The Book Thief, and Death narrates that story as well. And I just thought that was really clever, and I'm glad that I got to integrate that as well. No, Monk is the primary voice that you'll hear, and I chose him for the reason because there's a kindness and a wisdom to him, and I thought that his voice as a narrator was perfectly suited because of that reason. And you'll also, as we get a little deeper into the chapter, there's a portion that's directly out of my travel journal. When I was in Vietnam, I went to a small section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and got in the actual tunnels that the Viet Cong used during the war. And so you'll hear about that today. I was a monk in Cambodia, and death introduced me to my two American friends who fought to prevent the spread of communism. One was a soldier in Vietnam, and the other was a daring raven stationed in Laos. For us, this war, in the simplest terms, is the result of conflicting desires of those in power and those who wanted to be in power. The battle was played out on a grand scale by those who were not privy to the decision making process. They were the ones who suffered and died for their country. So did the countless innocent whose only fault was living on the battleground. Raven, Soldier, and I have discussed and continue to discuss the Vietnam Wars. What can we say about the Vietnam War? There is much to say. Everyone has an opinion. In fact, there are many conflicting opinions. At the end of the day, we do not know who or what to believe, so we believe what is in our hearts. Really, it does not matter who started it or who was victorious. All that matters is many succumbed, and many to this day are still suffering as a result of what happened so many years ago. War is never over. It permanently scars landscapes and hearts. I love to study, especially history. To me, it was not work to listen to the stories about countries. It was a series of words that created images about faraway places. And when you are a monk in a tiny country like Cambodia, everywhere else seems exotic. History made my world bigger. Everything I learned about Vietnam, I was able to tell Soldier and Raven, and they were polite enough to indulge me, especially given Raven and Soldier's involvement. Christ, don't believe everything you read, Raven said. Now we could tell you some goddamn stories. Maybe he doesn't want to hear our war stories. He's got his own crap to deal with, said Soldier. And you shouldn't be saying Christ and goddamn in front of a monk. He's bloody Buddhist, for Christ's sake. Soldier shook his head and laughed. He could not believe Raven's language. To somewhat rectify his naughtiness, Raven playfully added, Monk, from an educational perspective, what happened when Nam was under French control? I told them the French had occupied Indochina since the 1800s, a reign during which French coffers expanded from the sweat that poured freely from the brows of Vietnamese laborers toiling in rice fields and rubber plantations. Classic colonialism. The colony gets squat and the empire gets rich. The only thing to do is to break free of all that bullshit. America felt that way too. For us, it was the American Revolution. We fought the Brits for our independence, Soldier said. I explained that an independence movement was led by Communist Party leader Ho Chi Minh after World War II, resulting in what is commonly referred to as the First Indochina War. The American-aided French troops fought to maintain control over their colony, but to no avail. Remind me, when was that over? Soldier asked. At the Geneva Conference in May 1954. The conference was attended by the US, Britain, China, the Soviet Union, France, Vietnam, Laos, and my country, Cambodia, to negotiate a solution for Southeast Asia. By July of that same year, the result was a neutral Cambodia and Laos, and Vietnam was split into North and South at the 17th parallel. South Vietnam was controlled by non communist Vietnamese, and communism was firmly established in the North. I was not able to fully appreciate the impact of this until Raven and Soldier spoke of the political climate of the time. Everyone was afraid that communism was going to swallow up democracy. The Soviet Union was a superpower. In China, Mao was in power, and then there was North Vietnam, Soldier said. Holy Christ, North Nam had our government shitting bricks. They figured the rest of Southeast Asia was doomed, and to further prevent the spread of communism, we sent shitloads of aid to the new regime in the South. While the Chinese and the Soviet Union supported the North, I said. The ambition of Ho Chi Minh, I told Raven and Soldier, was to unite Vietnam under the umbrella of communism. By March of 1959, the Second Indochina War began, as did the construction of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Oh, we're well aware of that trail, Soldier said, looking at Raven. What? Raven asked Soldier, somewhat annoyed. I was waiting for you to Christ or goddamn it. I don't Christ or goddamn everything. Almost, I said with a smile. After my death, I learned that the trail, upon completion, extended into a 13,000 kilometer long network of jungle and mountain passes, dipping into parts of Cambodia and along Vietnam's western border through Laos. The trail was of the utmost significance during the war, as it facilitated the flow of a vital source of people and weapons. Did you know between the years 1966 and 1971, the trail enabled the flow of over 6,000 troops and 50,000 tons of ammunition? Not to mention food, I said. We knew the trail was important, but I had no friggin' idea how effective it was, said Soldier. Christ, said Raven. No wonder we were bombing the shit out of it. Decades later, when I decided to visit a section of the trail to see this piece of history for myself, I was delighted and a bit surprised when Raven and Soldier opted to accompany me. I'm glad we went. I was fascinated by the massive labyrinth of dirt tunnels and how the Viet Cong were brilliant at using what little means they had available to defend themselves. I learned that old men, women, and children constructed ingenious booby traps using recovered mines and ammunition. They utilized bear traps, crossbow traps, spiked mud balls, and camouflaged pits. The Americans, with all their manpower and sophisticated weaponry, were not immune to the primitive booby traps of these resourceful people. We were more afraid of those bloody booby traps than getting shot. I was shitting my pants the entire time we walked through the jungle, Soldier said. When we arrived at the entrance of one of the tunnels, Soldier and Raven saw the size of the hole they were expected to jam their western-sized body through. They laughed out loud, claiming, "No way, our asses will never fit." I instructed them to watch me as I demonstrated. I sat on the ground, with my feet dangling into the entrance, with my hands positioned on both sides of the hole. I slowly began to lower my body until I was waist deep and my feet were on the floor of the tunnel. Then I raised my arms over my head and continued to sink downwards. I lowered myself until my palms, dirtied with jungle debris, disappeared into an opening in the ground that was barely visible from the dried brown leaves. I was inside. Soldier, Raven, and I were able to navigate through the tunnels. For me, size was not so much of an issue, but it was hard for my big American friends, as they could hardly move at any level of efficiency through dimly lit tunnels. Soldier kept remarking that he could not comprehend how the Viet Cong managed in these tunnels during the heat of battle, carrying weapons, as he could scarcely navigate the tunnel at leisure. In some sections, we were on our hands and knees, slowly feeling our way because our eyes could not guide us. All the while, Raven complained loudly. Christ, to say this is uncomfortable would be an understatement. In other sections, we found ourselves waddling like ducks with our knees rammed up against our chests. Again, according to Raven, bloody uncomfortable. My brave Raven also screamed like a baby when what I suspect was a bat brushed against the side of his head. Christ, what the hell was that? When the eyes cannot see, the mind feasts upon the imagination, creating a paranoid fear that sticks to the brain like flies to bloodied meat. As we traveled deeper into the dark, perspiration grew slick across our dampened skin until it slid calmly down our cramped bodies. The moldy tang of dead air clung unforgivingly to our lungs. It was terrible. I hated it. I was desperate to get out. We were all unnerved by the experience and resorting to calling out to one another to ensure we were all accounted for. Soldier was the last, and we feared we would get too far ahead and he would be left forever wandering aimlessly in the tunnel. He panicked a couple of times. When he was about to call out for us, he heard us speaking to each other, and we were trying to pacify each other. Raven, wait. Monk, are you still behind me? Where's Soldier? I'm here, he said. Keep talking so I can find you. I greatly appreciated their concern. It gave me comfort to keep blindly edging forward into the nothingness. Even hours after we had climbed out into fresh air, I noticed my hands were still shaking. For the remainder of the day, and many times thereafter, our conversations revisited our trauma in the tunnels, and we expressed our admiration for the Viet Cong's determination, even Raven and Soldier, although they did so somewhat reluctantly. After our visit to the tunnels, Raven and Soldier wanted me to tell them what else my books told me about the Vietnam War. So I resumed and told them that before the war started, the U.S. government in South Vietnam feared the North would recruit the peasant community in the South. To hamper the Viet Cong's recruitment, the U.S. and South Vietnam strategists devised the concept of strategic hamlets. Oh, yes, I do remember this, said Soldier. The peasants were relocated from their villages, often at gunpoint, into fortified, isolated areas. How'd that go for us? Raven asked. Backfired, said Soldier. The plan backfired because the peasants resented being forced from their ancestral farmlands, and they had to work without pay in the hamlets. Within 2 years of the program's inception, the Viet Cong recruitment in the South was up 300%, I added. No shit, I say that backfired, said Raven. What do you know about the Gulf of Tonkin? Soldier wanted to know. Tonkin. I told them how an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin in August of 1964 proved to be the catalyst for the bombing of the North. My understanding is that allegedly 2 U.S. naval vessels were attacked by North Vietnamese boats. The U.S. Congress overwhelmingly passed a resolution giving President Johnson the authority to take all the necessary steps, including the use of force, to prevent further attacks against the U.S. Yeah, that's right, and we retaliated with deadly airstrikes, which at the time were supported by the U.S. public, said Raven. During the entire war, the Rolling Thunder airstrike campaign dropped nearly 8 million tons of bombs and sprayed 75 million liters of chemical defoliants over crop, farmland, and forests. Napalm, a potent jellied form of gas known to burn for extended periods of time and difficult to extinguish, cleared the countryside, resulting in 3 million refugees. Agent Orange killed trees and thick brush. Bombs and bullets destroyed or heavily damaged thousands of schools and hospitals and hundreds of churches, temples, and pagodas. The number of Vietnamese killed, well, it depends on the source. I've heard the US estimated it was 3 million, and the Vietnamese government claimed 4 million were injured. A million died in combat, and the long term consequences have yet to be determined. Although the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a heavily bombed target, your country had little success in halting the flow of soldiers and supplies from the north. Raven did not say a thing. The actual fighting on the ground took place during the years 1964 to 73, said Soldier. On one side were the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, so North Vietnam, and the National Liberation Front, which is a communist-led South Vietnamese guerrilla fraction backed by the USSR. The other side was us, the Republic of Vietnam, or South Vietnam, and it included Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea. Soldier did not want to hear of the Americans who served in the Vietnam. Close to 60,000 were killed, and some 300,000 were wounded. He was more interested in finding out about how, as the years passed, the war became unpopular with the US public. He wanted to hear about the many demonstrations and peace rallies held across his country and worldwide. Soldier smiled at that. I wish they'd held them before we were sent, he said. No disrespect to the fellows, as we did what we were told. We believed we were helping. Disrespect to our government. I can't imagine going home after all that hurt in the jungle and seeing protests. Man, that would hurt. He also wanted to hear about the peace discussions and the aftermath. I assured Soldier there were various attempts at peace over the years, but it was not until January 27, 1973, that the Paris Peace Accord was signed. 2 months later, all U.S. presence in Vietnam was gone. But peace was not to last for long without the U.S. presence in the South. North Vietnam resumed its reunification plan, and on April 30th, 1975, Saigon fell to the Viet Cong and the war was over. Vietnam was united as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, and Saigon became known as Ho Chi Minh City, in honor of the former Northern president. As I spoke, I carefully watched the eyes of Raven and Soldier. In Raven's eyes, I searched for the spark that sent him in a blaze to the other side of the world to protect it from communism. In Soldier's, I looked for the love of his family and life. In both instances, all I saw staring back at me was an all-encompassing sadness. Or perhaps it was a tiredness that lingered in a body too frequently paralyzed by the terrors of war. There is no light, and I felt nothing but sorrow for their extinguished spark. We had all witnessed too many deaths, the death of friends, the death of the enemy, the deaths of the precious innocent. Death was death, no matter whose side you were on, and it was bound to crush your soul to bits. As for my Cambodia, what happened to evil? Despite being responsible for one of the worst genocides of the 20th century, Pol Pot, I am sorry to say, was never tried for his crimes. Rather, he lived the remainder of his life engaged in guerrilla warfare against a succession of Cambodian governments, and was immersed in a series of internal Khmer Rouge power struggles. On April 15, 1998, amongst speculation he would be brought to trial by an international tribunal, Pol Pot died. The man who had broken the hearts of his people died of heart failure. He was discovered by his wife when she went to his bed to tuck in a mosquito net that had loosened in the breeze. My people were cheated of justice and denied the possibility to shed the burden of their suffering. When the flames of the funeral pyre burned high, evil was claimed by karma. The flames licked away at Pol Pot's body until it was reduced to ash, but flames could not take his heart because it had been burned long before. What does karma do with someone like Pol Pot? Of this I do not know. What I do know is that there were those who fought because they had to, those who were victimized as the war spilled into neighboring countries, and those who fought valiantly for what they believed in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Laos. That defines countless individuals. It defines us, a soldier, a monk, and a raven. We are forever watching, forever waiting, forever hoping that the path of our mistakes will lead others in a different direction. So today concludes the history. Tomorrow we will launch into part 2, which involves the women. And the first woman, Isra, she's from Thailand, and she is actually based on a real character. So find out tomorrow a little bit